Hi, my name is Lenee, and I am staff and a community organizer with the Carnegie Community Action Project. And the Carnegie Community Action Project works in the Downtown Eastside and as well as Chinatown. We work with low-income community members to, to fight for the changes that they would like to see in the neighborhood. So we work on land use issues, poverty issues, and housing.
Hello everyone, my name is Tessica Trong, and I am an organizer with Generation Squeeze, which is an organization that works to build Canada that works for all generations. But in particular, we want to look for solutions both in politics and pushing policy change, so getting young people, Canadians in their 20s, 30s, and 40s involved in making policy change that will create long-term change in terms of affordability. And so we're working on a campaign called Code Red, and you might have seen that in the documentary. And then additionally, I work as a co-founder and co-director of City Hive, which is an organization that aims to transform the way that young people are engaged in the planning, design, and decision-making in their cities. And so it's with both those hats on that I'm here tonight. And I've really enjoyed the film, really enjoyed how the diverse perspectives that were on there, and I would looking forward to talking more about it.
Great, thanks. I'm Charles Wilkinson. I directed the film with my partner Tina Schlieser up there, who is producer of the film. What we wanted to do, we make essentially environmental documentaries. We've made a number of them. Some of you may have seen some of our other work. Haida Gwaii, On the Edge of the World was our previous one. We reasoned that the environment that we live in is this one, and we wanted to make a story about this environment. And we tried as hard as we could to be comprehensive, to not, resort to easy finger pointing. And the more we worked on it, the more complex it got. As you can see, there are so many factors involved in all of this. But I'm happy to say that the film was a great success. We released it just before the election, and we won.
Hi, I'm Nathan Edelson. I was a planner with the City of Vancouver for 25 years, about 15 of those in the Downtown Eastside. I've been a planning consultant for the last while, particularly working in the False Creek South community, which is one of the examples that was used in the film. And I have to say two things. One is I really enjoyed the film, and I've seen it before, and I think it's just amazing. And it's one of the times where I think I agreed with every word Jean said, which may surprise her.
That really surprises me. Yeah, I'm Jean Swanson. I actually work with Lenee at the Carnegie Action Project. I also work with Raise the Rates, trying to get higher welfare rates. And what blew me away in the film was the photography. It was also really fun looking at all the familiar places, but the photography was amazing.
Okay, and now we're going to open it up for questions and comments from the audience. Please raise your hand and a runner will bring a microphone to you. We will do our best to maintain a speaker's order whenever you're ready.
Hi, good evening, and again, the film was terrific, so thank you. My question is to the gentleman, I forgot your name, who was in the planning 15 years ago or further back. Did you envision the city as a team at that point, the group of people that you'd worked with for your planning and the associated planning to get where you are? Is it double what you had planned, or is it at the point where you thought it might be? From a density standpoint and growth.
I think I mostly did community planning in neighborhoods such as Downtown South, where there was quite a big transformation of what's the area that's now called Yaletown, or along the SkyTrain routes, where we provided the beginning of the densities that you see now. But I think that the vision that we had then was that this would be one component of the city landscape, providing a particular function, that there would still be a diversity of communities, both within Vancouver, but also thinking about the region as a whole and where people live and where they work.
Hi, my name is Jan. I enjoyed the documentary, but I kind of feel like the people actually benefit from the making of the condominium, and actually the pink elephant in the room has never reviewed itself. So, you know, like the land developer, right? And actually the city itself is taxing on those property tax. So for me, as someone who came from Hong Kong, my sister was renting a place for $1,000 maybe in 2012 for a whole apartment. So she's now paying $6,000 for one room, sharing with 6 other people. So for me, I find it a bit offensive because I'm, come from this Chinese face. I kind of feel like it's targeting this, as an Asian from Chinese, as though the government in Canada and Vancouver do not have any responsibility to its own citizen of providing a livable space and affordable housing. So that to me is actually a big pink elephant. The money that could be also casino dark money, so money that made from war and drugs, that's flooding the market. I find that Hatching Act, if you ask them how much money will be made in building all those, the one who's profiting it, that's not actually being shown in the documentary. So it's a bit biased in that point. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. It's difficult when you're telling a story to satisfy all points at all times. I think we tried very hard, and I thought we were fairly clear that the developers support City Hall and that they donate enormous amounts of money to all levels of government. And I think we made it fairly clear that that's a pretty corrupt process. And at the same time, a great deal of the money did come from China. Also, a lot of it came from the United States and from Persia and so forth like that. But we tried to find a way of acknowledging that, because it's true, but also to acknowledge that the government could have regulated this. And we made that very, very clear, that our levels of government could have regulated it. They saw it coming, and they didn't. And the reason was because it was just too profitable not to. And I think Sandy and Sam, towards the end of the picture, made it very clear that there's an enormous amount of money, sloshing around and ending up in Vancouver. That's black money, dark money, illegal money, and it's not doing our city any good, but it's done some people a lot of good. And so I don't know how much stronger we could have put that without it turning into a crime drama, which in a certain sense it kind of is, right?
Maybe I'd like to respond to that as well, especially as I'm half Chinese, half Vietnamese, and I think that there's perhaps this housing crisis has allowed very xenophobic and kind of racist tones to emerge in the city. And it's really troubling, I think, especially because I see it primarily as a class issue, really. Because my family and my parents, they came here as refugees and immigrants, and I think many folks here in the room kind of feel very similar, but as a result of this housing crisis, there's a very strong anti-Chinese sentiment, and it's kind of blanketed across to an entire race, when really it's about investment, and it's really about treating housing as a commodity where it should be looked as homes. And so really with Gen Squeeze, that's what we talk about, homes first. Housing should be for homes. And while some people can look to, especially I think for a long time, you did look, as you invested into homes, that it was an investment as well, but that it was primarily a form of housing. And now I think it's just decoupled completely. And so we really do need that regulation at the provincial, federal, and also at the municipal level to change that and to make sure that housing should be a right, essentially.
As an Asian person, I feel like the anti-Asian racism has been escalating over the past few years. And before, the narrative was that you as an immigrant or a refugee was taking away our jobs. And now it's shifted, and it's like you are taking away our homes and our housing. And this, when people talk about foreign investment, they are not talking about Americans or Europeans or other investors. It's always on Asian investors. And over the last 2 years, the NDP has really pushed for this foreign investment myth. and it really has cast the blames on the foreigners, causing the inflated housing market. And this myth has been really pushed by politicians and the media. And at the Carnegie Community Action Project, we really focus on housing as a human right. And this myth, the foreign investment myth, has really perpetuated the idea of housing as a commodity. And we see that instead of the foreign investment myth, the housing crisis is really a result of the Canadian government focusing on housing as a commodity and having a commitment to the landlords, investors, big businesses, and investors in the guise of growing the economy. But really, it's just a commodification of housing.
Yeah, Lenee and I were talking about this today. I think what happens when you emphasize that the money is coming from China is it does increase the racist reactions, and it takes the blame off the government. So people are all out there blaming Chinese money, blaming Chinese people, and I don't know if any of you saw that graph that I handed around at the beginning. There's a slight problem here, folks, when the government used to build 30,000 units of housing a year, and now it's building 1,500. And shouldn't some blame go there for having cut those social housing programs? So I think it's really important that we put the blame where it really should be, which is that we need more social housing. We need more regulation of the rental market, and that blame goes on the government for not having those programs.
Yeah, I guess the research will take place over time to see whether there was corruption. I'd be very surprised, actually, but I wouldn't be totally shocked. I'd be very surprised. I think it was a coincidence of interest. Developers wanting to build, and it's profitable. Wherever the money's coming, I think even some people from Ontario bought units here, but then also a council that was determined to believe that increasing the supply of housing was the answer. And it took quite a while, and maybe, I see at least one of the councillors here, maybe it's a bit of slow learning, but the notion of the right kind of housing, the housing for our working people, the things that Gina's talking about, the demands for social housing by all three governments cooperating. And I'll just give you an example. About 15 years ago, my wife and I bought a condo near False Creek. And it was, I don't know, roughly 200,000 or so. It's now worth over $1 million. And we didn't do much of anything other than maintain it. And in False Creek South, where I'm doing a lot of work, there are people who bought or who joined housing co-ops. In some of those, that's on city land, they're able to spend about, let's say, between $1,200 and $1,500 a month in housing charges, and still have enough left over in their budgets to subsidize a third of their neighbors, actually more, and also to set up an investment fund to build more social housing. That they would put the down payments or the initial payments if the government money was there and the zoning were there. And it's just the difference. They worked as volunteers in their community to build a sense of community and did that sort of thing. And I think part of the challenge is going to be for people that have watched the value of their homes increase, how do we convince them that some of that has to be shared, that there has to be a pulling back if the prices are going to be such that their children can afford to live here?
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said. If I could just add one more note, is that one thing we discovered during the filming of the show, that the high-profile buys are from offshore people, and that's the one that just gets the headlines, and everybody says, oh, those Chinese or those whatever. But I think that at least as many, or possibly a lot more, of especially the condominium units are bought by people who live here. They're bought as an investment, and when we heard the number that 90% of, that sounds high to me, but 90% of the condominiums built built in the city of Vancouver are bought by investors, those people are not all from offshore. Many of them are from here because, I mean, if you can realize a 30 or 40% return on your investment in the space of 1 year, a lot of people went for that. And as you just said, that you know, we've got a large number of homeowners in Vancouver, and all of these people saw their personal wealth increase by, in some cases, millions of dollars over that period of time. I didn't see a lot of those people at the housing protest demonstrations. It's just not human nature. I mean, people got rich here. A lot of people got really rich, and they weren't all from offshore, right?
Hi, my name's Lawrence Boxall. I'm struck by a number of discussions we've had where there's an elephant in the room that's not being mentioned, and I just think that this conversation could be far more incisive and radical if we could discuss the systemic basis of this problem. And the systemic basis of this problem is capitalism. It's capitalism that brought colonialists to North America. It's capitalism that created the racism in the United States. It's capitalism that created the racism in South Africa. They had to create apartheid because white workers, garment workers, and black garment workers were going on strike together. So the best thing to do is create a racist attitude and stop these people from uniting. And it's not Chinese money, it's capitalist money that's coming in, or that's here, or whatever. So, you know, it's in the interests of the 1%, if I can call them that, that we squabble and point fingers and so forth. Ultimately, no one is to blame. Even the capitalist who's exploiting everything is behaving in consistent with the system. So it's the system that's actually right down at the very core of things. And that's what's got to be looked at. Even the 1% ultimately will suffer because of the consequences of this system. I just felt I had to say that.
Thank you. Thank you for the film. And I would appreciate if someone could, in as simplistic terms as possible, for time constraints, reveal to us or explain to us the levels of responsibility of the three governments. Because in the film, you have the mayor who says, we asked for this, we asked for social housing, we asked for funding for this. So he's very comfortably deferring. To whom is he deferring? And so where is the block? I mean, the block, as someone who's in the heritage sector, a lot of destruction of our built heritage falls with the city of Vancouver. However, for social housing, where is the block? At the level of the municipality, the province, or the federal government? Thank you.
That's a good question.
Can I give it a try? So back in the old days, it used to be that the city would provide the land and the province and the feds would split the building cost. And welfare was high enough to pay for, which was provincial, was high enough to pay the operating costs. Nowadays, the city is saying, well, we only get 8% of tax revenue, so we're going to continue to provide the land, but we can't provide anything else. That's what they're saying. I think they could provide more if they wanted. But the province and the feds are just providing a drib here and a drab there, and they're not providing very much. And there's this whole concept of partnership, that we have to have a partnership between the feds and the province and the city and nonprofits. And the problem with this partnership concept is if you're a partner, you can't trash the other partner and still get the dough. So the city is not very likely to say, well, the province should be paying more money because they're afraid they might not get anything, especially when it was Rich Coleman in charge. And so my personal theory is that we, the people, have to push the city level of government to demand the amount of money that we need from the other two levels of government, at the same time that we're pushing those other two levels of government more directly to get the kind of money that we need from them. I don't know if that helps.
Thanks for the film. There was a couple references. The one clear-cut scene, this is sort of, and the other one with Bob Rainey talking about, you know, greener, taller. As somebody who lives in a rural area in BC and has witnessed so much of the resource, you know, suck and clean out that is going on to feed kind of detached, you know, concentrated urban growth and urban needs. As well, somebody very concerned about ecological sustainability planet-wise in terms of rising oceans and the dynamics of what we're going to be facing in global weirding department. I'd love to hear some comments or feelings about sort of that ecological. The other part that I see all the time whenever I come down to Vancouver is you know, backyards and trees just going, like you know, all these greener areas being turned into just cement and the odd tree poking out of little holes in cement. And I just wondering about that kind of ecological sustainability dynamics with Vancouver, if we can get any comments about that.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's one that's certainly really near to my heart. When I was a kid growing up, I'd travel, you know, in the middle of the province and all the western provinces, and you'd see all these really thriving little towns like Valemont and Barriere, and you know, they all had a mill. They all had people who had good middle-class jobs. They were raising kids, and the kids really liked it there. They had amazing outdoor experiences, stuff like that. When you drive through those territories now, every one of those towns is boarded up. I mean, there's plywood everywhere. And the people who bought houses there, they can't sell them. The mills are gone. They're exporting the logs and so forth. What Fayez said in the movie is true. The stuff's gone. I mean, the easy stuff is gone. And so what are we going to buy all these things that we see in the store that are imported from China? How are we going to pay for those things? We can't pay for them with logs or fish or minerals anymore, so we're paying for them with our land. You know, it's like we said in one of our other pictures, it's like a junkie selling his wedding ring to pay for one last fix. That's where we're at right now. So that doesn't bode very well for the environment. And it's always been that. There's heartland-hinterland conflict in Canada, and guess who loses, you know?
I'd like to chime in on that as well. I think that, like, one of the major reasons that people love that Vancouver and the West Coast is because of its natural beauty and like access to an outdoor playground, essentially. And I think there's a strong belief in protecting it as well, as you've seen in recent politics, I think. But I think that the affordability crisis is such that like it's preventing us from like spending more time outdoors, spending time with each other. And so there's a real impact on not just like connection to nature, but I think also social inclusion and cohesion. And I grew up and have lived in Vancouver my whole life. And over the course of this past fall, I had 5-6 friends that, you know, all left. And it's not the exodus from Vancouver. It's not a theoretical thing. It's personal. It's very emotional. And I think in the documentary, talked about, you know, I think David Suzuki was saying, you know, the biggest political statement you can make is to say that I'm staying here and that we can put up a fight and that this is our city and we need to make sure that we're making a city that doesn't just point the finger outwards but points and has responsible policies and governments that are dealing with making sure that this city is for all of us that grew up and lived here, but also that we can have a life where we can spend time with each other, quality time, and connect with nature. And because I think, at least for me, I've thought about it. I've thought about leaving. And it's not because I don't love this place. I love this place. All my family's here. And yet, if I know that it's with almost certainty that I'll never be able to buy a place in Vancouver and that rental policies aren't really protecting renters, there isn't that security, that stability that I know that I can set up and create a family here. And so unless policy changes or we do have regulation that really limits investments in the city, this affordability crisis is tearing our city apart, and it's pushing people out of the city that have grown and have strong connections to this place.
So when I was young, I moved here when I was 24, and I didn't really start working till I was 30 or so. I was busy having kids. But anyway, by the time I was 30 or so, I kind of realized that I was never going to own a home. I was never going to make enough money to own a home. And I thought it was in some ways it was a political statement that I was going to be in the same boat as the people that I was fighting for. In other ways, it was a financial reality for me. But I got into a co-op, and folks, it's fine. You can have security without owning a home. I've been there for 29 years. My rent is $531 a month. I have a wonderful one-bedroom apartment that's big. A lot of people could live like this in housing that is not a commodity, but housing that's a human right. And yeah, you don't have to own a home in order to belong or to be part of something. So anyway, I kind of learned that from living in a nice co-op.
I just want to say a few things. I mentioned before the Falls Creek South co-ops, and it's similar to Jean's experience. And yet this is for some people, the argument is being made almost turned against the people because they didn't choose to own a home. And the critical variable to me is the increase in home ownership value expected to be faster than the cost of living? Because that's really what's happened. And our wages are not anywhere near keeping up with that, and that's a big part of the inflation. The second thing, in terms of government, it is the right kind of housing that's so important. And the first step is we've got to end homelessness. I mean, everything that Jean said, that's got to be in every single way. It's in the movie. Seth Klein says it really well. Homelessness is expensive. It's just a shame for everyone here. It demeans our culture. And it's achievable. And I think that one of the good indications, I think, by the city council and the province, as soon as the provincial government gave it a priority, they are putting in at least the temporary housing, and hopefully the permanent housing will follow that quickly, but allow people to be off the streets. The third piece is the relationship between jobs and housing. If you're going to create areas where people are going to work, there should be housing to meet that workforce. Not that people are forced to live there, but within easy commuting distance. And that's a critical piece. The way to think of it, at least in my mind, is we think of Vancouver. We're at the western edge of a continent. We're isolated from many other urban centers. And more than that, Vancouver is really Northwest Surrey. And you'll see that if you start thinking of it that way, then you'll see what we need to do. And part of what well, it's just true. I'm sorry. You'll have to live with it. That's where the population is. That's where the region-serving jobs are. That's where we've destroyed a lot of the environment and where there needs to be a lot of healing. And to me, there is a role for high-rise. I think it's a limited role, but there are some SkyTrain centers out along even Coquitlam City or Port Coquitlam, not on the SkyTrain, but Port Moody, other places are developing interesting centers. But to me, the key has to do with the kind of mid-rise densities that Walter Hardwick and others that were on our city council, Art Phillips and so on, developed in Falls Creek. Virtually every school and every park of any size could be surrounded by medium density housing, with the center point being places for children and families, and really focusing on how do we age in community, how do we build the kind of care facilities that are local so that we value a sense of community. It's not just the numbers of units, It's where they're located and the qualities of the environments and the ways that they can encourage people to stay in their communities and to get to know one another.
We have time for one last question.
If I could just jump in really quickly, you talked about the environment. I think one thing that all of us can do that's extremely concrete is we can pay attention to the Kinder Morgan thing. That has the potential to destroy our city from my humble point of view. And there's going to be a huge demonstration that all of you are coming to on March 11th, I think, or March 10th. Yeah. And so March 10th. So please really put aside everything else that you have to do and come out for that, because it's absolutely critical. Please.
Yes, do that. More dramatic, the better.
Hi, my name is Margot. I'm 21. I think I'm probably younger than a lot of people in the room right now. So I grew up on the North Shore. My dad probably is sitting on his retirement right now with his house that he bought for $400,000 when he married my mom, and they moved to North Van because there was no two-bedroom apartments in the city at that time. They just weren't being built. I've traveled for 2 years, and I've come back to a city that is really different. The North Van that I grew up in is not the same. Lower Lonsdale is like a whole new place that, to be honest, I don't really want to be a part of. It all looks the same, which is maybe an aesthetic point of view, and maybe as like when you're talking about co-ops, it's kind of irrelevant, but I think from a cultural aspect and from like a young person aspect, it's important to me. And I recently moved to East Vancouver. I pay $750 to live in a two-bedroom basement suite on Fraser and 31st. I work 2 jobs, I go to school, and I guess my question is, I've just seen so many of these like affordable houses like being torn down that are like historical at times, like valuable. And we talk a lot about, you know, the at-risk communities, which is totally valid. The Downtown Eastside is horrendous. It's awful to walk through. You feel like a walking hypocrite for buying a coffee and then walking out to a person that's like sleeping on the streets. It's disgusting. But I guess like as a young person, like I don't feel like I don't know what my options are to like live in Vancouver. I don't want to move to Surrey. I don't want to move to Poco. I want to live in East Vancouver for personal reasons. But I don't really see like where I fit in to that as like I don't know. I feel like it's this, the city is just so hypocritical, right? For the reasons that we are all in this room, right? Like we're all immigrants. Do we stop we can't stop immigration. That's so racist. But then like how do we make spaces for us that are culturally valuable, that I want to be a part of?
So we need political change to make room for everybody. We need to make those changes to house the homeless, to put brakes on the escalation of rents, and to build social housing and get housing out of the market. That's how to make a place for everyone. That's my humble 2 cents. Not so humble, maybe.
Maybe just echoing that, I think that there's no lack of solutions. Other cities around the world have faced similar things, and they have implemented policy change. And so really we need to get organized and mobilized. And so come join us with Gen Squeeze. There's the rental tenants union that's out there. There's a rally that's happening this Sunday from 2 to 5 p.m. that's organized by the Affordable Housing Hub, which is a coalition of different housing organizations at Jack Pole Plaza. There's many, many different ways, and especially with the municipal election coming up on October 20th of this year, I think there's a huge opportunity to influence folks who are running, incumbents, to talk about housing and the solutions that, quite frankly, we do have. They are possible, and I think hopefully we can push the provincial, federal, and municipal governments on all 3 levels, because really what we need is change on all 3 levels to be able to have the affordable housing. Because I think alone, I think we can take some personal responsibility, but really it's systematic change that needs to happen.
Thank you so much for that question and for discussing how you can get involved. I believe in direct action. I think everyone in the room here believes in direct action, and this conversation cannot stop here in this room. We have to keep going and find ways. So thank you for asking that question. I'm sure you can join all these great organizations here who are doing good work in the community. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panelists, Charles, Nathan, Lenee, and Tessica.